Hosted by Dr. Alex G. on behalf of Serve Wisconsin AmeriCorps, Transform Your Leadership invites you as an AmeriCorps member to engage your own journey and transformation as you become leaders who enrich lives and communities. Now here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. I want to welcome you back to this AmeriCorps Serve Wisconsin podcast. This is episode number 5. But the previous 4 episodes, I talked about my perspective on transformational leadership, what it takes, what it costs, and what it looks like. With this particular episode, we're asking the question, how do I lead when I feel unsupported in my organization? If I don't like my boss, or my boss doesn't like me, or if I'm struggling within my organization or my program, or I don't know how to really function or bring all of myself to it, what do I do? And so, because I've never worked for AmeriCorps, I can't clearly say, well, this is what happens in the first month or the first 2 months. But I still want to help you to think through, how do you thrive in this space? I want transformational leaders to know that we don't just become stronger leaders in ideal situations, that oftentimes it is the unlikely situations, in the ugly situations, in the stressful situations that our leadership really emerges. When something needs to be fixed or straightened or something needs to be reorganized, it calls on a special level of leadership. And so one of the things I want to say before I introduce my guest is there are a couple of things that you can do to bring your family and friends along. Make sure that when you're having banquets or you're having events, you need volunteers. It's a great way and a great opportunity to get your friends and family involved. Sometimes you're trying to explain the concept of what you're doing to someone who's never seen that done. Or they may be wondering, well, why do you have a college degree and then you're going to go out and work for almost nothing? So be persistent, but invite them to activities where they get to see your gifts on display. Let them see the kids you're working with, the families you're working with, because when they see you in action and they see you coming alive and they see people who you're serving come alive because of the work, that has a great potential to touch people's hearts. And so invite people. Secondly, be persistent. That doesn't mean asking them every day, but because someone says no this weekend doesn't mean that they can't do it for January. So just keep it in mind that you want to bring it up before folks. The other thing is, I've noticed that when people become woke and they are aware of issues of disparity and brokenness, they become the experts and they then begin to diss or disrespect their whole family members. And so just be careful that you don't become the know-it-all. Hey, mom, you didn't capitalize that B in black. Give people grace, give people space. They have not necessarily had the relationships, the training, or the opportunities that you have. So make sure that you, and I've seen this happen, unfortunately, where people, particularly folks from the dominant culture, have had an awakening, if you will, and then they're policing the speech and the actions. And I'm not talking about hate speech, because you should police that. But I'm just saying, just being overcorrective, just overcritical, and then they come across as sort of the white savior, the person who gets it, and the rest of my family's asleep, and I'm the woke one. And that level of pseudo-arrogance can put people off as well. So I know it's tricky to get family on board with every decision that you make, but inviting them into your world, trying to help to nurture relationships, let them see you at work and enjoying what you're doing, and be a bridge builder, and don't be a police to your family. Not, that it's bad to be a police officer. You know what I mean? Don't police the activities, the dinner, the meal. Through your own transformation, through your own leadership, be an example of what you want your family members to know about your work. So let them see the best in your work and not feel like you have now become someone who is above their family or distant from their family because they are not as woke as you. Bring people along. Help to wake people up. Don't get mad at them because they're sleeping. You were just asleep a minute ago. So really help to wake them up through the love and passion that you have. I want to shift from there to something else. I'm going to be talking with a guest. Her name is Jack Hay. And I had a chance to meet her a few months ago and had a real interesting conversation with her. And so I realized that some of you are wondering, Well, what happens when we go through this training, Dr. G? We're learning to be a transformational leader and we're getting these skills. And then we may work inside an organization that may not really espouse those skills, or really they might be counteractive to those kinds of things. And they're really dismissive of people and speak negatively about the people that we're serving. What do I do? How do I work? How do I bring about a change when I'm in that kind of environment? And so today was so interesting, and I think it's wonderful, is that Jackie has been an AmeriCorps volunteer, but has also stayed in that world and in that arena, and now helps to supervise AmeriCorps staff who are coming in. So she knows what it means to be new. She probably has some insights into what do you do? What does it feel like when you feel that you're not supported inside your agency, or they don't necessarily espouse the things that they say they espouse? How do you operate within that system? How do you function? How do you get out of that system? And what do you learn as a lesson as a transformational leader in that space? So I just want to pause you for just a moment and just introduce you to this very intriguing and incredible young lady. Jackie, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show and talking with me. It means a lot. So I hope you're not too nervous, and I hope you're okay about having this conversation.
I am. Thank you for asking.
Sure. You know, what I have found is that when you want to understand leadership, you don't just talk to the people who've written the books and created the theory, but you really talk to people who are in the trenches. And what makes you a leader is not just your title or your office or the space you work out of, but it's your ability to influence others. And so for you to have served the state of Wisconsin and folks in your community and to still be involved in bringing service is a tremendous thing. And I'm overwhelmed when I see young people like yourself really caring about what's happening in our community, and you've chosen to be a part of the solution when you could be doing other things. I think it's really commendable. So first, let me just say I laud you for just your care for people. You're talking to a fellow social service professional, so I get what it takes and what it involves. But just know I really respect the fact that you've chosen to work in the arenas that you do. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So from the time you started as a new AmeriCorps service person to now, how many years have you worked in this service industry, human service industry?
Well, it's probably been 2 years now.
Okay. So you've been at it a minute.
Yeah, and I had a little change. Like I was really trying to find my way in education without becoming a teacher. So that was quite interesting for me.
Sure. And so did you study education? So that's what you mean by that being your background?
Not really. My degree is in English, and I feel like unless you're like going to be a big writer, people think with an English degree, the only thing you can do is teach. And so during the research that I did or pursued in undergrad, I really wanted to find a way to impact education and not necessarily become a teacher.
Gotcha.
I don't think that the traditional way we deliver education is something that I can conform to.
Gotcha.
And so I just wanted to be able to impact it in a different way.
Sure.
I mean, I'm an educator. I just am not a teacher.
Definitely.
You know what I mean?
No, it makes sense. We have to find different ways to educate and influence young people and adults. And so I think it's great that you know the difference, that there are many ways of doing this. So let's go back a couple of years to when you were wide-eyed, as my generation would say. You were new as an AmeriCorps member. You got your placement. First of all, just take me through the process. How much say-so does an AmeriCorps member have in where they're placed? Or is it somewhat random? Or was it random for you, or did you get to select or rank your preferences of where you wanted to go?
I think it depends on the AmeriCorps organization.
Mm-hmm.
In the few that I know of, there are situations where you say, like, you identify the type of work that you want to do, and so then you are placed at a certain place, you know?
Sure,
But there are other times where you can say, I'm interested in these several things, and then you can go and interview with the organization, various organizations who hold some of the things that you describe in their job role, and then you interview, and then you both can decide, like, who do they want. So there are some where they can interview however many members that's in your cohort, and then you match. But there are other places, like, say if I want to become a tutor. Well, we have these 7 schools where we need tutors, and your organization will choose where you go.
All right, that's very interesting. So I want to ask you about a scenario that came up when I recently addressed a group of AmeriCorps members in Milwaukee last month or a month and a half ago. And someone said, what happens, Dr. G, when we come to this training and you're giving us lessons about how to become transformational leaders, how to respect people, how to lead out of our pain, and then you go to an organization and they don't necessarily espouse those values. It's just a job, and you don't see the level of respect. And so what I want to ask you is, have you experienced in a placement or in your placement where maybe the actions of the people were different than the said or stated values that were held by that organization? And if that is the case, how do you function within that arena where you feel you're going against the grain? So first part of the question is, have you ever experienced being placed somewhere and you're thinking these folks are not living out the mission of this organization?
Yes, that's very well said. And I did my second service year. I had really gotten excited about the organization. I believed in the mission. And when I interviewed with them, I felt that the panel was super diverse, so I thought that I was going to work with a lot of, woke, quote unquote, woke people.
Right.
And I was extremely excited. And then once I got into the organization, maybe just a few months in, I was like, oh, I feel like they were being fake. It was some people, with various levels of knowledge on diversity and inclusion. And for that part, it was like, yeah, I think you have the tools, but in this organization, it doesn't seem like, especially in the department that I was in, it didn't seem like it came through in the work. Yeah, that was a lot for me.
Sure. So you have this commitment. You show up at this place. You've had a diverse panel. And so you find that not only is it different than what you thought, did you find that constraints were put on you from doing the work of the mission in that organization?
Not initially. I think because of the AmeriCorps organization that I was a part of, I think that some people at the organization where I was placed, was eager to learn about the things that we were taught, because the organization that I was in really focused on teaching us about what I call isms, like capitalism and racism and sexism.
Sure.
So initially, those conversations were welcomed, and multiple people at the job wanted to have discussions. And it was then that I noticed oh, this is more to it than, just conversations that we have at the dinner table. People are having conversations with me in this way, but in the rest of their life, what is it? Conversation or theory versus real life.
Sure.
That's what it started being in my head.
They weren't putting it to practice.
Have a conversation with me on theory, but these are people's lived experiences, and it doesn't just stop after this conversation.
Right. So how did you motivate yourself to get up and go to work every day, still wanting to make a difference in someone's life, but you're realizing that for some it's theory? I'll give you this example. I used to work at a roast beef restaurant, Arby's, when I was a kid, but I hate roast beef. I might do the ham and cheese sandwich, but I hate roast beef. And so for me, I could serve it with a smile. Do you want that with an onion roll? Do you want that with fries? But I wasn't going to eat it on my break. I wasn't going to take it home. If they offered it to me for free, I wasn't going to take it. It was just what I peddled to get a paycheck to get through high school. What I hear you saying is, for some folks, this is just roast beef. They can name the menu. They can tell you how it's made, the temperature you cook it at, the speed at which you slice it, but they're not going to eat it when they go home.
Right.
It's not a part of their lived experience. They might even be vegetarians. So you're saying that folks know the theory, but there's no love for the product. Is that a fair assessment?
That's very well said too. I like that analogy.
I'm a storyteller, so I got to make up those analogies. So then, what motivates you to come to work and to still stay true to your passion and your gifts and the mission when those who are around you, maybe even supervising you, weren't supportive, didn't understand what you were doing, and may have seen what you were doing and saying to be countercultural of the organization. How did you just motivate yourself to do that? And at what point did you, well, let me just let you ask that question. Let me just let you answer that question first.
Okay.
How did you get up and go to work every day?
Initially, I had a conversation with some other AmeriCorps members who were placed at the same organization.
All right.
And we discussed, like, boundaries. We noticed, like, that some conversations would leave certain people feeling away. And I was one of the people who would probably walk away from the conversation feeling away.
Sure.
You know, and so one of my colleagues just said, you know, maybe there are things that you shouldn't discuss here because it's going to make you feel something. So maybe you have topics that you talk about at work, and then you take that away. And then that worked for me for a small period of time. Another thing that I tried to do is, like, change my focus, because this job allowed me to work in the office and also be in the community. And so the way, or the reason for me getting out of bed was because I knew that my impact was with the young people that I was working with.
Sure.
So I could stomach what was happening in the office. But the best part of the day, you know, the fulfilling part of the day was when I was in front of the young people who I wanted to serve.
That's
eventually
great.
That came to a head, and I'm just a vocal person. Like, I really try to not be. But with the trainings and just the conversations that once people noticed, like, we weren't willing to have, then it just became like well, let's talk. And there was an issue that happened where just things needed to be said all around the board. And so I might not have felt supported, you know, with the placement organization. I just feel like maybe people thought that I was, you know, like what you described in the intro, like, maybe this girl just thinks she's too woke and she don't know how to live her real life, you know. Or as a young person, some people of color believe that this new generation and the generation under me are very sensitive. And so once those issues started to, like, come to surface, I reached out to my AmeriCorps organization and asked them for support. Mm-hmm. And they were able to help me get through the rest of my service term.
So did they believe you? So when you talked about okay, so that's helpful too. I mean, because what's happening is you're giving me key insights as to how to navigate this space, and so they gave you support. So at some point you had to reach out and say, I'm vocal, but it's not enough for me to do this on my own. I'm going to reach out to AmeriCorps folks who understand the values for which I was, you know, recruited, trained, and hired, and I'm going to let them help me. And right. And they came and did that. So that's a very important lesson also for the folks who are listening to this podcast. Do what you can. Use your transformational leadership skills. If something is being said in a staff meeting or some things are contradictory, just say, hey, I'm sorry, this is inconsistent, or we said we wouldn't do this, or we didn't do this with that resident or that participant. Why are we doing it with this one? But when things get to the place where either you're being shut down or frustrated, or your career trajectory might be hampered because you're just trying to be supportive of your clientele, mm-hmm. you at some point you got to be able to bring AmeriCorps in, and that's helpful. So people, what I hear you saying, Jack, is that you don't have to do this on your own. There are people who can come in and help you because AmeriCorps wants you to have a good AmeriCorps experience. I take it.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, and I feel like I'm thankful that you caught that. And then the other part I just want to touch on is sure. like what my AmeriCorps supervisors or program managers share with me is that, you know, when they make these partnerships, these people, these organizations are saying, like, yes, this is something that we need. And it was an agreed upon relationship. And so people have to hold you accountable or sure. each other. Because if I'm late, you're going to tell my AmeriCorps supervisor. And so you asked for me, and this environment is not that welcoming, or, you know, whatever the issue may be, just communicate.
Wow. That's very helpful. What were your support networks like? Like, were you part of a small group? Were you part of sorority? Do you have a tight-knit family? Who did you talk to after work, before work, just to keep you sane and from just self-destructing?
Yeah. Oh, that's so deep. But no, I think
because in this work, you have to find other support. This work cannot be your life.
It can't.
Right.
It can't, because then, like, there's a training that I've been introduced to since then that talks about identifying a problem versus identifying an issue. And if we keep saying that we're trying to attack this problem, then you're never going to really feel like you're doing anything, because problems are too big.
Sure.
You have to break the problem down into issues. Now that I've been exposed to that, I can say, like, I won't go into that.
Sure.
But back to the question about my support system. Again, I was lucky that it was more than just me at the organization that I had the toughest time at.
So you had you had internal people. Did you have any external people? You don't have to name the groups, but were there?
No, I won't. But
there
yeah,
other
I did
people?
have some external people. Like another one of my friends who I met in undergrad. She's like a sister to me now. She was also in an AmeriCorps program, like far, like up north.
Sure.
On the East Coast somewhere. So some of that was like, well, this is what I'm experiencing. What are you experiencing? You know, what's your organization telling you, or what's your AmeriCorps program telling you about issues like this? But not only that, you know, I reached out to my aunt and my mother. You know, my mother is corporate. She always grew up telling me that I'm not corporate. And so I shared some of my experiences with her, like looking for insight. And my auntie, who had been in nonprofits for a long time, I just really talked to them, and
Great.
we really had a lot of intergenerational conversations about like what works now and what doesn't work now,
Sure.
opposed to what worked for them, you know, when they were entering their professions, and what doesn't.
It's a different world now, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
and it
different.
just helped me see like everybody has a role to play, and
Yes. The next question, probably my last question, is, but you're still connected with AmeriCorps. So you must have learned something through that experience that strengthened your leadership, your transformational leadership. So tell me, how did that situation and your ability to navigate it help you to be in a supervisory role now? That's intriguing. I'm very proud of that as well. You didn't allow that to turn you off to the whole industry just because you had a challenge with one agency. So just talk to me a little bit about how your leadership was strengthened and forged in that process, and how does that inform what you do now as a supervisor?
Yeah. Thank you for this question.
Sure.
I think what's interesting is when you talk to higher ups, whether they want to tell you the truth or not. I've often heard that large nonprofits are like microcosms of societies, right?
Sure.
And so knowing that and seeing that, like, I'm going up against mindset of people who probably never really met a person like me, you know, besides what they see on TV.
Sure.
It didn't make me want to like run and like let them continue to think whatever. It just made me want to impact. Like, I believe in representation. Like, that's probably the root, or not the root, but I just really hold that I can always bring a conversation back to representation. It's one of my key topics, I think. And so for me, it's about representation. But not only that, once I started like really researching the organization of AmeriCorps, I just fell in love with it. And, you know, coming from Milwaukee, being in the inner city, it just makes me think about how many young people could really benefit from an AmeriCorps service or an AmeriCorps term. And so I just wanted to do my due. I'm not sure, you know, who targets the Milwaukee people, but I was trying to, I guess that's one of my missions, like to find out how much I can so I can make sure that all young people have an opportunity to experience AmeriCorps. Because when it's done, you get an education award. And I think some people, you know, fail to realize that when young people go to college, you're actually making an 18-year-old sign up for all this debt or a possibility of all this money that they can get and then not know what to do with it. And, like, I'm not doing the same thing I said I wanted to do when I was 18. We're not taking into account, like, what life experiences may change this person's professional trajectory, if you will. And so for me, it was like, well, I think I would like to work for all AmeriCorps organizations at one point in time, because everyone is unique and everyone is different.
Sure.
Everyone has their pluses. But not only that, you know, when you just like are really trying to find your niche and you have some really bad experiences, and
Right.
it's like I walked away from some of those like, okay, well, I know that's not for me, but let me see if this one is. So it was just like a curiosity,
Sure.
and I just ended up finding a nonprofit that has AmeriCorps members that whose mission I can get behind. I believe that nonprofits are just microcosms of their society. The nonprofit that I work for, I definitely believe that they have recognized like where they may have moved in error, and they're actively seeking ways to be better. And so for me, that's something I can get behind because
Sure.
nobody is perfect, you know,
Right.
and we're all trying to do better. And so I wanted to be a part of a nonprofit that I can say that and like be sure that that's what's happening.
That's amazing. That's amazing. See, folks, I told you that Jackie is an amazing young lady, and she learned to take not only the good experiences, but those that are more challenging, and allow that to really shape her leadership. And because that was the decision she made, rather than just defecting, she found a really good fit. So listen, I know that you got work to take on today, but I want you to know that I appreciate the time you've taken to talk with me. And this very honest conversation is going to be used as a training tool to help people figure out how not to just give up everything because one part is not going well. So thank you not only for being on this interview, but thank you for being in the community. Thank you for being woke. Thank you for waking others up. And thank you for speaking up on issues. Don't stop doing that. You may find nuances of how to do that in different scenarios, but don't stop speaking truth, because there are so many people who are not woke because they've not heard truth. So I appreciate you, and I hope our paths cross again. So you have a great day, all right?
Thank you. You as well.
All right. That was really helpful to have Jackie just talk to me a little bit about her experiences, because one, I've not worked as an AmeriCorps participant, and so I'm wanting to make my leadership theory and principles applicable, but being able to discuss them with someone who can actually relate to the listeners of this podcast is really, really exciting. So let's break down the conversation that we had just a little bit, that even though Jackie bumped into some rough edges in that particular placement, she didn't just take off. She didn't just say, this is a bad fit, I'm gone. Because folks who are transformational leaders or wanting to be transformational leaders realize that even in difficult times, you're made into a stronger leader. That we are not shaped as leaders in a vacuum that's free of pain and discomfort. That it is through the abrasiveness of our interactions, difficulty, having to apologize and being apologized to, having our feelings hurt, having to put ourselves back together, that strengthens us as a leader. If we're going to be leaders, and we are, we have to understand that adversity to automatically go up the chain because something is not to your liking. So you could ask questions. Could you explain to me why this is not a consistent policy? Or can you explain why we do this with this population but not that population? Try to work it out within, because one, you get the answers straight from the people who are making the rules, or from your supervisors. You get a chance to give some feedback, but then you also get a chance to assess the situation a little better by being an insider. Now, when it starts to impede your emotional health, your mental health, your physical health, when the environment is so toxic, you got to decide what's really going on. Is it you or is it the organization? Because if it's you, you're going to take you every place you work, and you'll keep repeating the same mistakes. So when there's conflict, when you don't feel supported, when there seems to be a difference in approaches, ask yourself, is this a chance for me to be flexible and to bend and to learn? Or am I in a scenario, in a situation where people sold me something in the interview process, but they really don't want to do this? If it's the organization, you can ask questions. You can have a mediator. You can make suggestions. You can bring in new programs. You can offer solutions. If you do all of that and it still doesn't work, then you do what Jack Kay did. You bring someone from AmeriCorps and just say, hey, I was hired on these principles. I'm not sure that there are opportunities to really live this out. There's a signed agreement. We've got to hold each other accountable. What can we do to make this better? But she learned from that process because she ended up becoming a program supervisor where future AmeriCorps participants are actually placed. And so I would venture to say that some of the bad experiences, and not just the good ones, have shaped her to become a really good supervisor. That it's not just her own work experiences that allows her to become a good supervisor, but at some point, her company, her organization will not sync up exactly with the thoughts or perspectives or experiences of a particular AmeriCorps participant. And she will have to know how to communicate, how to adjust. At some point, her organization that may function with very woke people may find itself at some point behind the curve or just lagging culturally, and it will need to revamp or reinvent itself. But because she knows what it's like to be on the other side of that discussion, she will be better positioned to hear suggestions and recommendations as someone who tried to do the same thing inside the organization. And so I think that this is a good part of our lesson. Don't just run from conflict, although everything within us typically tells us to run from conflict, to avoid it. Understand that it makes you stronger. It gives you clarity, it allows your passion to show, and it doesn't have to be destructive. You don't have to destroy someone or their reputation just because you disagree with them. You can bring your ideas to the table, but then understand we need some mediation. And then that's what she did. She brought someone else in. I just want to highlight just another thing that I said a little earlier. I just think it's really important to bring self-awareness into conflict. In the last podcast, in episode or installment number 4, we talked about self-care. Self-care is important because it helps you to become more visible to you, your flat sides, or that's your weaknesses and your strengths. So that when you go into a scenario and there is conflict, some people can isolate the conflict to what we are actually discussing today. There are others who bring every conflict they have ever had into every conflict they're going to have. So if you disagree with certain people, they can become volatile and emotional and upset because everyone, disrespects me. When I was a kid, no one respected me. My parents didn't listen to me. So you just want to make sure that as a transformational leader, you don't bring all of your hurt, pain, and angst into the workplace. That if someone is not supportive of an idea, it does not mean that they are not supportive of you. If someone doesn't like a piece you wrote, doesn't mean that they undervalue your education or your writing skills. It could just be your take on this piece. So as a transformational leader, know yourself. And that happens from resting yourself, taking care of yourself, and be able to say, you know what, I'm being a little emotional in this one, or I'm being a little sarcastic. This is reminding me of a situation in my life years ago, and I'm letting that creep into this situation, and it really shouldn't. Learn how to put doors on those things so that if you're dealing with issue A, you're dealing with issue A today. You're not dealing with a shade of issue A with your mom or dad 6 years ago, or a teacher or a coach or an employer when you were a kid. Make sure that you're coming to the table fresh, which means you can shake off any residual stuff that has nothing to do with your current scenario. So that what you're discussing is what you're discussing. What you're fighting is what you're fighting. What you're dealing with is what you're dealing with, and not all of these other pieces. I hope this episode has been helpful. Again, these are things that I wish I had been taught when I was really new in my service work. If I had conflict, I just thought it was horrible. If people didn't understand what I was doing, I questioned, am I doing the right thing? So talking about what you do if you don't feel supported by your parents, your family, your friends, your partners, your spouses, what do you do when you don't feel supported? How do you bring them in without shutting them down? And what do you do and how do you function in the workplace when you feel that they are not supportive of your lived experience, your cultural perspective, or your desire to align with the stated values of their organizations? You've got to know yourself. You've got to work to function within that situation because you learn coping skills and navigation skills and professional skills. Again, those things are all forged in conflict. It doesn't have to all blow up, but you have to be able to hang in there and learn how to Bring your voice to the table and state your concerns, whether they're verbal or written. You have to learn how to be clear and consistent. But then you also have to make a decision. If this organization is not necessarily leaning into its ideals, am I here to help it do so? Or am I here to learn what not to do, to get some good skills, and then move to the next thing? You've got to be able to know that some folks have walked into conflict and it was their job and task to bring order because they have the skill set for doing so. There are others who are there just for a season. They learn what not to do. They bring their skills and their strengths, but they understand, I need to bounce. I've got to move on to the next thing. And so because you have to also take care of yourself, you can't deal with the traumatized folks who you're serving and then how that might touch and trigger your own trauma, and then have the trauma of folks at work not knowing what you're doing or why. So understand yourself, understand conflict, understand the ideals of the organization, understand your own limitation, and understand people's ability or willingness to bend to who you are and what you bring to the organization, so that you will be able to understand that when I come to work every day, I'm growing in the midst of conflict. I'm bringing growth to others because I'm saying things that they didn't know, because some of us are placed in these places to bring about change. Everyone's not going to take up the happy wake up pill and then they're suddenly woke. Some people have to be awakened, and some of us are those who will awaken them. But do not do so at your own detriment, the detriment of your mental health or your physical health. But understanding that that might be an option may help someone to understand why they are in a particular situation and not totally feel trapped. If you feel that you're in a difficult situation, you have to understand that either you're going to be changed in that scenario, or you can bring change to that scenario, or that scenario is training you to be a better and more effective transformational leader in the future. I think that piece is really, really important. All right, that brings us to the end of our 5th episode. And I just hope that you will take these lessons and you'll be better because of community. Thank you again for listening. And I trust that it's going to make you a stronger leader.